This talk is going to be more about a story about the building and about the people involved. And I set myself a question that I can't answer, which is where does it fit or sit in Stirling's oeuvre. But I'm going to show you a bit about what's the world as I saw it when I started, a bit of history of Stirling, and then straight into the building, which, as John said, was somewhat daunting 6 months out of college to be asked to do it. But I'll explain that in a bit more detail in a minute. The practice changed its name from Edward Cullinan Architects to Cullinan Studio. And I was asked about what The Edge is. The Edge is a multidisciplinary think tank that tries to get people to talk to one another. I can happily explain a great deal more about that, but I think not now, because it's not particularly relevant. Jim, Big Jim, is not uncontroversial, upset quite a lot of people along the way, but as I hope will become clear, he was fantastic support for me, and I'll explain the beginnings in a moment. This is the drawing that appears in various forms. I think this is possibly my version of it, but I mean, they were all directed by Stirling, and it'll reappear several times later. But the thing is that the building to the right, which is abstracted, is a conversion of a building, which I'll show you in a minute, and that conversion was done by Ted Cullinan and the team then, while I was busy doing the other one. So we all know this building, and it's been brutalized a little bit, and I did do my time trying to mend the odd leak in it, but it is still a quite astonishing composition. I think there is a sense in which actually this is where the origin of the way of organizing volumes has more to do, at Hazelmere, has more to do with this than anything else that had gone before. Because that was followed by this one, which was seen to be a stinker by lots of people, and won the competition because, for a very simple reason, that it was a single librarian could see every book, and there was a problem about people stealing books, and it was rotated through 90 degrees because the university didn't own the site, and it overheats, always did, and there never was a final account because it always leaked. And then the Flory building in Oxford, which is pretty strange, actually, as a building. It's got some really nice things about it. It was extremely badly built, and was being extremely badly built when I joined the office. And it's had various ups and downs since. I think it's had a major investment recently. So there is quite a lot that's written about colour and Stirling, and there will be that's going to appear quite a lot through this. The first colour was fluorescent orange handrails in the Cambridge Library. The second colour was lime green handrails in the Flory building. But there was this amazing yellow object in the History Library. And I don't quite know where that came from, but there was a kind of myth around. Leicester was such an extraordinary building. It instantly made Stirling the bright young thing, the bright young kid in Britain, all over the world. And that led to people thinking and writing rather strange things. And if you take the section, Alvin Boyarsky wrote an article in BD in which he mirrored it and suggested that that because this was early days of moon rockets, that this was clearly a deliberate act. Well, it's just a kind of architectural historian fantasy. It's got absolutely nothing to do with it, but still it was quite enjoyable as a conceit. And there is a fourth red building that nobody talks about, which is in Gloucester Crescent in Camden, which is quite an ordinary block of flats with 2 flats on the floor. It's not, I don't think it's a great building, but it's airbrushed out of history. This building, I think, is a really interesting one, which is Dorman Long. So this was the building. I don't think there's anybody from the family here, so I can be slightly more indiscreet than I might be. This is the building that actually funded the office for quite a long time. So it was a private steel company, Dorman Long, that was nationalised by the Wilson government. And it was nationalised at the point at which the working drawings should have been finished. And they weren't, but they were paid for. So that was enormously helpful for a youngish practice. But I think it's really interesting in terms of it being, you know, some of the other projects, that this was an industrial process building. What else was going on? Well, Lasden was the grand man in a way of course, Lubetkin had become a pig farmer. Lasden was very powerful, and they're not all exactly the same date, but this is the University of St Andrews, as you know, now listed, and Ted was the job architect for the student residences. So that was a great relationship. I went to, Bucky Fuller was, there is a sort of bit of a linkage, I think, between these. Bucky Fuller was asking us to think differently and was clearly way ahead of his time in terms of doing that, as we see it now. And I went with several other people from our year at Cambridge to work in Canada in the year out, and went to stay in Habitat and went to see the dome at the Jizz's Dome at Montreal Fair, which I absolutely adored. I thought it was fantastic. It was the cheapest pavilion the Americans had ever built in any world fair, and it was universally hated because you went up an escalator about 3 floors, and then you went up another one, which was the largest escalator anyone ever built at that stage, about 10 floors, when you arrived and you could touch the lunar module that had just come back from, you could actually touch it, right, hanging from its parachutes inside the dome. But why they hated it was because they had to go up through a headdress of Native American headdresses. And to every self-respecting white American, this was an insult. So it's really interesting that this fantastic experience was abused. But Fuller was a really interesting man. And I suspect most of you won't know what that is, but it is Archigram's proposition. Archigram were working with Theo Crosby on Euston Station before what's there now was built, and as working with Taylor Woodrow as well. And they made this proposition for the British Pavilion at Montreal. Of course, it wasn't affordable, but it was quite a nice dream. And what we got instead was Basil Spence's fragmented flag, which was tragic outside and worse inside. But it was an incredible experience. Of course, Cedric Price, we had met as students. Florian Weigel used to take us around to see him for quite a lot of drink in the evening and a lot of entertainment. And I always thought that the Potteries Think Belt was the best ever project. And later, because bearing in mind that I started work for Jim in '69, later came the Centre Pompidou, and I love the contrast between the competition winning entry, the built building, and the critique that have some of the critics that have emerged. Alan Cahoon wrote a quite amazing article about it. So, what else was going on? Well, when I was a student at the Bartlett, we were really badly taught in the 4th year, and I'd been at Cambridge, and it was an extraordinary mix of people, half graduates from the Bartlett and half from outside. And we were so badly taught that in 1968, we just took over running the 5th year ourselves and wrote the programme, hired the staff, organised the events, sacked the staff, tutors, whatever. John Weeks, who was a partner of Llewellyn Davis, was one of the tutors and was a completely extraordinary man who invented a thing called indeterminate architecture. Then, I mean, I'm not going to talk about that, but basically you can if you have enough mullions, structural mullions, you can put them wherever you want them, according to need or feeling. You don't have to, there's no regular rhythm. And the library at Essex University is also of the same ilk, but that was by ACP. But John Weeks was just brilliant to have around. So then there was a bit of this stuff, fiberglass, emerging, and the principal client was British Rail. And these were by Arthur Quarmby and somebody else whose name I'm afraid I've forgotten. But they were just kind of in the background. There was pneumatic architecture. The architectural design was very important on a Monica Pigeon in this period. And of course, for us as students, there was the Vietnam War and demonstrations and Paris kicking it off. And the universities were occupied. The students had enormous power. And hopefully the people running Extinction Rebellion will also make people quake, old and young, in order to change the way we behave. But then it was linked to a market thing where the children, young, were suddenly a market because they could buy clothes. Carnaby Street, the guy opened the first shop in something like 64. So that was the circumstances in which this man here, Bob Maxwell, who was my tutor, who we stopped going to teach in the States that particular year on the basis that we wanted to be taught by him. He said to me right towards the end of the last year, the final year, he said, "Oh, I had supper with Jim last night. He needs somebody. I think you should go and see him." So I say, "Oh, I don't want to work for some egocentric architect like that. I want to go and work for Arup Associates. I want to work in a multidisciplinary team at Arup Associates." And he said, "Okay, well, the deal is I'll arrange an interview for you with Philip Dowson on condition that you also agree to go and see James Stirling." So that was easy. Went to see Philip Dowson, and after an hour, which was a ridiculous amount of his time to spend with me, he said, "Come back in 3 years when you might be of some use to me." So I went to see Jim, and Jim said, "Can't you do working drawings? Start on Monday." So that was all his fault. And what was really interesting was that there were 8 of us and Joan, the secretary, in 2 rooms in Gloucester Place by the traffic light. And Jim and Michael were in the back room with a nice big bay window and a carpet. And we were in the front room with bare boards and all the stuff coming through the windows and the noise and the temperature. And David Gibson, who's there, number 3, is sitting there. So he was there before me. He was a year-out student. But Roy Cameron and Michael Wilford had been, if you think I'm telling too many stories or going on too long, I'll stop. But this is the way I'm planning to do this. Michael and Roy had been part-time students North London Poly. Michael was fantastically successful, and Jim, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. He was a great right hand for Jim. Roy was from Billericay and was really a kind of rock star manqué and was not terribly happy being an architect. But he was the job architect for the Flory Building and was sort of got it built and then left the office and went to live in a forest in Finland. but I don't think he's with us any longer. Julian Harrop was the only person who knew in the office who knew anything about building construction. And he was fantastic, very quiet. Well, he's become obviously a really big player in the world. But Julian had a really extraordinary background, which is he'd been an apprentice boat builder before he went to architecture school. So he really knew about materials and got us all thinking about him. And as Jim and I would drive backwards and forwards to Hazelmere to site visits, and I'll tell you more about that later, my one task was to try and persuade Jim to hug Julian and to make sure he didn't leave, because Jim wouldn't do it. Then there was David, and he then eventually left and went back to college and went on to great things and set up a practice in Islington after years at Sandy Wilson. Then Leo Creer had forced his way into the office by Jim hadn't answered any of the letters he'd written, and just after 1 year at Stuttgart, he just turned up and said, I'm coming to work for you. So he just was the draftsman. He wasn't allowed to design anything. He did that at home at night doing competitions initially. And he used to be called Leo in those days. And there was me, and then there was Alfie Buse, who I only kind of remembered, dredged out of my mind. And he'd worked on St Andrews, and he left fairly soon afterwards. So this was, and people would, I haven't got a picture, unfortunately, I wish I had a picture of the room. People would arrive from the States, ring the doorbell, famous James Stirling, and they'd come in and we'd welcome them and make them feel at home and give them a cup of coffee and sit down, and they'd say, so where's the office? And we said, I don't understand the question. Well, where's your office? This is the office, these 2 rooms, this is all there is. No, but where's the 200 people who make the money to allow you to do these buildings that you're doing? So that was a kind of really, suddenly realized that we were in quite a special place. David's going to heckle if he gets, if I say anything too out of order. I was pretty excited about the St Andrews as a plan, as an idea. Jim had been to Ted Cullinan had taught me in the second year at Cambridge and invited Jim to give a lecture and a crit, and that was all very exciting. But I thought this was a quite amazing building. The problem was that it leaked like a sieve because the joints between the precast concrete panels were really complicated, and nobody could build them. But they did discover, and I don't quite know where it came from, never looked at it, the idea of diagonal ribs in the precast concrete panels, which we'll see again in a minute, to deal with the rain, so that it spreads the stain. And I've never seen it, but I kind of feel that I know it really well. And on the strength of that, probably, somebody told Fred Lloyd Roach, who was chief architect of Runcorn, to employ Jim to do the Southgate housing at Runcorn, which was, from memory, 1,850, might have been 1,750 dwellings. And these are the page from the first book, which was referencing Bath and London squares. That all seemed fairly sensible, except that this is the diagram. So the town centre is up above, and this was the highest density housing. Everything else is sort of garden city stuff. We're surrounded by motorways and big banks to protect the noise, and then bridges that aren't shown on this drawing that come off the landscape into the walkway at the second floor level there. That became a bit of a problem eventually. And it was pretty monumental. I mean, I think we thought it was rather heroic, actually, and the concrete was fantastic. These panels, I remember going to the concrete factory and seeing these precast concrete panels as far as the eye could see. And great round windows, so I've used round windows ever since. And this is a drawing by Kriya of that deck. And my job, after spending 2 months doing falls for drainage in the car park, was to design this wall to the right-hand side, which is the deck is really narrow, and was really narrow, and so it had to be as thin as possible. This prefabricated wall. Any material would have done. I had to make the case, but as you can see from this photograph, because it became quite a celebrated thing. They are striped coloured fiberglass panels, which is the best I could, what I thought was the best thing. But look where the column is in reality compared with the drawing, and the idea that Jim had of the fiberglass going up and over, and the protection of the people from. So it was a classic piece of post-rationalisation, and in a way, nothing wrong with that. Except that it was disastrous. So this is the site from Google Earth now, and I haven't got a pointer, so I can't point at it. But I did go there once after so they built half of it, and then it became an instant social disaster. And the second half was built. They stopped building the precast concrete and built fiberglass-clad houses in rows on the lower part of the site. But you can see at the top there, you can see that band of trees as a mature band of trees is about the only memory that's left. But I did go once when they demolished all the housing, and there was just the footprint of all these trees, these ells of trees, which was completely fantastic, and it's a real shame they didn't, the architects didn't work with that. Anyhow, the disaster was that the kids had scooters, and they would go up onto the banks and go across these bridges and shoot down these roads, terrorizing the mothers and children at whatever speed they could go. So it was tragic, really, but we thought it was great. So that's the end of the history lesson. Well, not quite. It's the first bit of history lesson. Olivetti was ambitious always in terms of design from the beginning, and the Corb factory is pretty interesting. I couldn't find a plan, but that was just time. And there was, when I got married in 1969, we got given the Valentine typewriter because it was very fashionable. I've still got it somewhere. The Sotsas designed the chair, which we used to have some of those in the office. And I can't get the dates to work here, but I was brought up to believe that Carlo Aladeff, who was the boss who employed us, had employed Ironman to build the offices in Germany, and then had gone to Japan and Ironman had told him to employ Tanguy in Japan, and then Tanguy had told him to employ Stirling in England, and then Stirling told him to employ Meyer in the States. The Meyer building never happened. The Tanguy building's been demolished. Certainly the storage building's been demolished, but the Ironman buildings are still there. There was a sort of expectation that Olivetti was a classy outfit, but they were also they did machine tools. Adding machines, things like that. They were early computers, but not very good ones. And they were the second largest or third largest office furniture manufacturer in Europe. And I can't remember the date, but when we had joined the European Union, we introduced metric with decimalisation. So there was went from pounds, shillings and pence to pounds and pence on a metric scale. And Olivetti thought, this is our chance. We will replace every office machine in Britain with an Olivetti machine. And so they set up this program, which was to build a training centre at Hazelmere, a headquarters in Milton Keynes, and a series of regional centres all over Britain. Now, this is, Carlo Adaduff was the boss, Bertolino's right hand man. Giuffredi was I got on fine with him, he was the local Hazelmere man. This is Jim arriving at Ted's house to discuss the fact that Jim didn't do conversions, and would Ted please do the conversion at Hazelmere, which he did, and did it so swiftly that he immediately got appointed to do the regional centres, which was actually the thing I really wanted to do, but that was tough. And the regional centres, I'm sure they'll be familiar to you, the idea was you could have this unfinished courtyard that would be of the appropriate size, that could fit any site, that would be built of concrete on the lower floor for garaging and storage, and lightweight off-site manufacture upstairs with daylight for the showroom and the technical support. And there it is being, so while you were pouring the concrete, you were ordering the off-site stuff from the factory of plywood and steel. And so this is a full-blown Egan product 25 years before Egan wrote his report. And it's brilliant. And the other thing is the decimalisation program, there was a recession, it didn't the whole program stopped, and they only built 4 new ones, and there were about half a dozen conversions. But that's what Derby used to look like at the top left, and the top right is what it looked like inside. It was Derby, yeah, well, you don't need to know where they are. So this is what it looks like now. This is, this is Google Earth. This is the building. So what was on open countryside is now the smallest building in an industrial park. And it was pretty mucked about, but then it was bought by a logistics firm. And here's Ted at the opening of it when they'd more or less restored it. So that was really nice that he did it, and loved it to bits, and the local MP came, and there was lots of press. And that's what they look like from the outside, and the one at Dundee. And this is Carlisle. As your first built, I'm sorry, the slide's really awful. It's in the centre of Carlisle. And the great thing about these buildings was you could use them for almost anything. So it became very quickly, after the end of metrication, it became a Chinese restaurant, and then it became a nightclub, and then it became a carpet showroom, and I think it still exists. Dundee has, until recently, been a design office, and was the best one, in terms of all of them, was the one that was best looked after. But it's really interesting to think about long-term use of buildings. So, Olivetti Hazelmere, end of introduction. I was really upset about this, what I was doing, and cursing Bob for getting me into this position. When Jim comes in one morning with a roll of drawings, and he gives them to Julian and me and says, could you draw them up properly, meaning in ink? They were, I can't remember, I think they must have been 1 to 100 on A2 sheets of paper. And so we did that and went round to see Olivetti with them, and Olivetti said, Carlo Adaduff said, yeah, great, okay, get on with it. So there's a complete mystery as to how those original drawings got drawn. And I have a theory, but there is absolutely no evidence, and I've never been able to challenge her. I've tried it out on 1 or 2 people. But I think Barbara Littenberg drew the buildings with Jim off-site. Anyhow, it didn't matter, because he asked me if I would build it. Now, this was a building, and I've shown you one picture, the classic picture of it, which was completely designed without any structure, any services, or any materials. Sort of any materials. That's the team. I don't need to go through there. That's just for the record. This is the existing house after it. Bottom right, you can't really see it. It had lots of big chimneys when it was originally built by E.J. May. Ted took all the chimneys off and put some new dormers in. But most importantly, that view was, the entrance view was here, enclosed the courtyard, so inverted the house, covered the courtyard, which was originally services, and in that thick line was able to put all the new services up on the inside in order to create an atrium and an entrance hall that led off to D at the top, which is the Stirling Building. And this is just one slide of those. The flares are quite good. That's the garden front. They're dreadful photographs, but you can see that there was a ramp going up. The front door, new front door, was straight ahead there. And this was this kind of staircase where, unbelievable, of course, over the time, it was just brilliant. There was a special niche for the phone box for the pupils. So there was one push coin phone box in a special throne in this staircase. That's history. And there was some quite strong stuff was written about it. As I said earlier on, Stirling is upset quite a lot of people over the years. How one longs for the steadying hand and exact eyes of James Gowan. I mean, it's quite odd as you leave the extension of Stirling's greenhouse turns into Cullinan's more delicate conservatory imagery. I mean, that's reversing the journey, but that doesn't matter. But other people, I don't know who H.A.N. Brockman was, but I thought he was pretty good. If you want to see an armadillo dilloing in his armour, go down to Hazelmere, which I think is just brilliant. But the last bit is, which can do, at Hazelmere one can see and easily appreciate the continued search through modern technology for an aesthetic logic which can do nothing but good for the future of real architecture. So there were some believers out there. I think I'm going to pass over that one. This is the site plan. So it comes up, Hazelmere's over here, and you come up a steep wooded drive, and Ted had built an amazing Swedish sauna, Norwegian sauna there. And came up, this is the entry into the original house, whereas the original entry was here. And this was the Stirling building, and there was car parking in the woods and playing fields. There's lots of, it was just an amazing site. And that's looking through the gap between the two existing buildings to where we were to put our building. And that's the steel frame of the link going in. And that's Ted and I, 7 years ago, going down. There's an article in the RIBA Journal about revisiting old buildings on the roof, talking about it. They're a bit side. So this is the upper floor plan. I really need a cane to point at this. So this is, it's a fractured extruded section with a tapering with false perspective glazed link with a ramp going down 2/3 and up 1/3, and the hall, which was subdivisible into 4, and we'll look at all of those. And this is the lower floor level where same general pattern, but you can see here that it was meant to be unclipped and extended, and these were steps down into the hall with a kind of escape around the back. So, and this was subdivisible into 4, and these were American wind-up walls that would close the space off. And these were quite exotic toys in terms of moving parts, but that was very of the moment, and it has to be said that they weren't really used except to show off to visitors. That's the section through it. And you can see the hall in the background, which is glazed. More of that later. So the Rayner Banham's highest praise was calling it festive. His article in the Architectural Review was more about trying to make sure that Ted got proper credit for what he'd done. So the origin of this was, and the origin of why the background's yellow, is that this building was designed to be yellow, which was the Automobile Association yellow, and it was the colour of the moment. And when we went to see the planners, first of all, we never talked about the colour, and we showed them the drawings, and the chief planner of Hazelmere said, well, Mr. Stirling, that'll be very nice, providing you put you hang tiles on it, the whole elevation, so that didn't go down very well. So then there was a bit more happening, and Olivetti did manage to make quite a large donation to the swimming pool, and we got planning permission. But we got planning permission without the colour. So then we were hung out to dry, and we went to, Olivetti invited, the mighty Carlo Aladef came down to show the alternative colour arrangements, and I think Jim had me draw up, these long, thin elevations, something like 15 alternative combinations of colour, including, these ones, bright ones, but quite, and eventually we settled on parchment and stone, which is what got built. But there was, it was interesting. And of course, the origin of this material is really here, which is, this is, Jim had taught Rogers and Foster at Yale. And while Bob had dinner with Jim and told me to go and get a job there, Rogers had told Jim there's this wonderful American material which they use for trucks, which is 2 skins of aluminium with foamed plastic in between, polystyrene. And it's just wizard material, and you zip them up, you have zips to join them all together. So that was what the material, the building was designed to be. But and this is the Rogers DuPont competition, the problem is that you end up with 4-way joints on the roof, either flat or tipped, and there's no conceivable way you can make them waterproof. So, and the original module was 4 foot, and I made it 8 foot, because 4 foot was far too narrow. Afterwards, Rogers did this really amazing. So yellow was definitely the color of the moment. This is the factory that was made of glass reinforced concrete, and more of that. So John Young, Rogers in those days had an office in Marylebone on the roof that they'd built, and in the ground floor was a fantastic local pub, and John Young and I used to have lunch together on a regular basis and swap. He was a real technologist. I was just a fly-by-night, but we did swap quite a lot of materials, and this glass reinforced concrete really got me. So this is the section through the building. 2-story building, nothing very complicated, except that this is Creer's, under Jim's instruction, post-rationalization. That's Jim's drawing from the Architectural Review. And look, I've written here again, as originally designed, self-supporting GRP roof and wall units spanned from the reinforced concrete central core to the podium. First floor slab was supported by flanking columns rising to the first floor only. To comply with fire regulations, the concrete framework has been extended to provide a complete reinforced concrete box, but this is not structurally necessary, which is complete rubbish. But it was the ambition, and I did this morning find a file at home which had all my efforts to try and design panels that would structurally manage to span as that description had. Thank goodness we didn't do it, because they were all had to be 3-dimensional double curvature structures, which would not have been nearly as good. And this is what it actually looks like with expressed precast concrete columns and beams, and pretty good too, I think. We worked with Sven Rindel of Samuelis was the main structural engineer. He told me you couldn't make a column smaller than, precast concrete column smaller than 8 inches by 8 inches. So there we are with three good sides, and I stuck a bit of plywood on the outside and a stud. And This was pretty scary. I mean, David Weinberg and I, neither of us had ever detailed anything ever before. So it was a bit strange. And I think quite early on convinced Jim that it needed to be fiberglass without really knowing what we were letting ourselves in for. And we had fiberglass consultants, and they basically did double curved structures, or for swimming pools and squash courts, or folded plate structures, which were thin single skin aluminium fiberglass. Because it needed to be stiffer, this was foam laid into the mould, so it was cast face down, and we were worried about thermal expansion. So these dishes were ostensibly to let it flex. Of course, it's so stiff, it never flexed at all. The whole panel grew and shrank. And then this, I won't go through all the details, but the consultants, we were doing precast concrete. We'd learned how to do precast concrete joints. So precast concrete joints, you have a waterproof, stuff at the back, and then you have this indent, which allows you to put a strip in to take the wind pressure to stop the rain blowing through to the back of the joint. So it's a very simple idea. And so I thought, oh, that's brilliant, we can do this, we'll do this Hazelmere. And the Polyplan, the consultant, said, yeah, and you could do it with an evacuated tube, so it's like a bicycle tube. So you suck all the air out, stick it in there, cut off the end, and it expands to fill the joint. All of which was fine, except for tolerances weren't quite up to it. And they also specified the wrong thickness of tube, so that it wouldn't fit when it arrived on site. So it is mastic, but it by and large hasn't leaked, but it does, if you go there in the morning, I don't know if it still does, it ticks, the whole building ticks as it expands in the summer. And this allowed me then to put the rock wool insulation for the fireproofing and slot the heating pipes through. So it was I was really happy doing all this. And occasionally we'd go to Jim and say, do you think somebody should come and have a look at what we're doing? Because we don't really know what we're doing. He'd say, oh, I expect you'll be all right, Robin. So it was just an extraordinary faith in our ability. So this is a precast concrete factory, lovely columns. There's the site. The columns were 2-story high, really went up quick, and it was a single bolt each end. I just loved it. It was just so simple, elemental thing, and single pours for the first floor deck that tied it all together. And of course, the great thing was that the precast concrete was there, and the substructure was timber. So when something didn't fit, you got a hammer and chisel out and altered the substructure, which you can't do with metal. And there were lots of working drawings. Jim was really interested in this idea, once we'd got the materials and everything, of a hood over the windows, and lots of variations on that. And so that worked a treat for me, so we could get the joints to work there. These are kind of drawings. I think it's for Hannah and Alfred. Those letters are all drawn with a stencil. It was just unbelievable how boring it was doing the lettering. But anyhow, there we go. That's the section. Those were the part of the tender drawings. And this was the result. I mean, this is, some of these photographs aren't pristine quality, I'm afraid. They're copies of copies and whatever. But I thought that was pretty amazing. The good photographs like this one are Richard Einzig photographs. And inside, it was lime green. So that was, this was a real breakthrough as far as I was concerned. Come on, Jim, we've got to make, this has got to be, we've got to make a mark here. And he got completely with it, and we decided it would be lime green and gloss walls and ceilings, and black Pirelli studded rubber flooring. That was the answer. Don't think I really need to. There was the only major change over the initial drawings we made, because I tried to alter the plan and it was unalterable. It was completely locked in, is that he saw the link as being a single plane. And in fact, the structural consequences of that were so huge that I eventually persuaded him we could crank it, which is not as pure. It's the roof, really amazing. So we made trays, 3-bay trays. I mean, it went together pretty neatly. And there you'll see, Jim thought, one day said, oh, I'll tell you what, we need to make sure that they can see the panels going up and down. That would be fun. And so, well, why not? Yeah, we can put paint and glazing on either side. It's easy. So there it is. See the panels going up and down. Not that there was anyone to see them, but I mean, that's neither here nor there. I was completely with this. The problem was, what I just didn't get is we designed a greenhouse. And so the poor devil had to go in and service the motors roasted in there. So that was a bit of it. I left the office and went to South America, and then I came back. The penny had dropped that actually we'd made a big mistake, and I spent quite a lot of time trying to persuade him to go to Olivetti and say that he or somebody would pay for putting vents, which would have been relatively straightforward. But that didn't work, and can't remember. This is inside so this is looking away from the existing buildings with the ramp going up and down. That's getting closer. So the link is tied together with bars, with these rods, which is what makes it much smaller as a structure, and then it all gets taken out in that vertical rod there, which is also the expansion joint. So the expansion between the two wings is taken out with a single pin, which I thought was quite good fun. And that's in colour. There you can see the pin at the bottom there, looking back. And we planted vines in there, and for the first few years, they had the most unbelievable grape harvest inside this thing. But they found that all too difficult to manage, and they have, vine mites and everything else. And then the most extraordinary thing of all was, how do you clean the windows? So I was getting, people were going to the moon. This was no trouble at all. What we do is we'll build a machine and put it on the roof. So you could have a man on each side, or a woman on each side, and there was a handle somewhere that so you could wind yourself up and clean the roof, wind yourself up a bit more, clean the roof, and then got off the other end. It didn't last very long, because it was just easier to do it from the ground with a long hose. But it was pretty amazing. It came by with police escort from Dartford or something like that. And it was pretty. Olivetti were just over the moon about it. And this is Kriya's drawings after the event, pretty accurate. And this is how it was. The hall was meant to work. It was meant to be subdivisible. It wasn't used that much. But the question was, go back one, which is, if you're going to have this thing that you can divide into 4, how do you hold it up? If you've got to lift these panels, how do you manage it without building a huge structure over the top of it? And Sven and I had the most terrific fun, because that's the first thing was to realize that we needed a center post, because then you've got 2 guides. So you've got 4 panels and a post. And then we realized that if you take 4 equilateral pyramids and fall them in on themselves and put a plate at the top to hold them apart, then you can build a structure on that. And these turnbuckles, when they were built, were such that you could, then you build up the rest of the structure. And this morning, only this morning, I found this drawing, which I did in 1970, which is to show how it actually worked. And those turnbuckles, you could lift it up a millimetre or down a millimetre. It was just completely extraordinary how easy it was, but it was a bit daunting at the time. So there's a sort of, that was one of the contract drawings. That's clear drawings, upside, downside elevations. Now you can see the access into the roof void to where the motors were was about this size. I mean, it was just completely out of order in terms of today's maintainability, but it wasn't an issue then. And inside the hall, you had this festive, Bannon's words, space, Olivetti furniture, the great steps, the wonderful columns, and a spiral staircase to die for, which was designed by Dominic Michaelis, who was an architect. And he had one in his house. And another dinner, Jim went to dinner with him and was really impressed by this thing. It was only about 2'6" wide and a spiral. And he said, but it's all right, I've got one that you could have, I've designed one that's cast aluminium, I know each tread was 900 or probably a metre. And so the only cast aluminium spiral staircase designed to this system with gull wing treads is in this building. It's really, really beautiful, and I'm sorry I haven't got a close-up of it. And because we were designing everything, here you can see so this is the control panel that we had a lot of fun. So that was the Giuffredi, the boss of the school, loved coming and playing, showing off how everything went up and down, the lights went up and down. So I enjoyed that. I didn't say that the lifting panels were designed by a James Bond set firm, because of course builders couldn't do it. And that's looking from outside. I took the photograph off the poster to the right. One of the things that's happened is that the building, you can see the staircase beyond. One of the things is that so it was Olivetti, and then they sold it to a thing called Style Conferences that actually ended up owning two Cullinan buildings and a Stirling building as conference centres. They were all ex-SAS people, super secure conference facilities. And they sold it to a wedding venue people who owned it when I was there last, and it's now a Muslim boarding school. But apparently they love it, which is nice to hear. But along the way, it got painted really horrible, all kinds of different lime greens instead of being a single gloss. And the shutters for the columns were so beautiful, I suggested to Jim that we should park them in the landscape. They didn't last forever, but it was quite good fun while they did. And that's what it looks like today, well, 2011. So they've blocked off the glass panels to the lift-up housings. And it kind of needs a bit of a clean, but it's sort of more or less there. And they covered the roof over, so that's what it used to look like, just to remind you. The green, I didn't spend, the green radiators were made by Runcorn, which are Irish. So they were the largest, they were the maximum size Runcorn you could get, because you couldn't fit them in a container if they were any larger. But they worked a treat. So this was all pretty extraordinary, being allowed to do all this stuff and not really quite knowing what we were doing, but it more or less worked. And the contractor was brilliant. The contractor was called Dave Skelly, and they'd won the job. Mighton's won the job sort of by mistake, and this was a thank you present for having built part of the Barbican, which was a nightmare to build. And he and I really hit it off. And because we were both natural collaborators, so that was fine. And I wasn't qualified or anything, but I'd sit at the end of the long table for the site meetings. Jim would come down every site meeting. He wouldn't sit at the table. He sat behind my shoulder in the corner. and didn't react to anything anyone said, and we held the meetings. And something like 15 years later, Dave Skelly found me at the office in Cullinan's, and we went out for lunch, and he said, "We were so impressed by Mr. Stirling. Do you know, he would let you run those meetings, but he was sitting behind you. We knew that he knew every item of every clause in the contract. And if we said anything wrong or you said anything wrong, he'd be onto us like a ton of bricks." Jim had never read a JCT contract in his life. But it was the presence which was fantastic. And the fact that, of course, that he trusted me. So there you can see they've covered it with disgusting carpet. They've painted it different colours of green, but it's kind of still there. Ish, and we're nearly there. It's all right, you can begin to relax now. What else happened? Well, as I said, there was the training centre, the regional centres, and the headquarters in Milton Keynes. So this is Korea drawings, and there's Jim and Bryn Rich's and bits of Jim's Thomas Hope furniture in the lobby. And there are all the, that's view. I mean, this was a big building. It was to be a regional distribution centre and major office, and there are the office types going down the concourse. But for me, I said, where does it all fit? I don't think Olivetti does fit in a big story about this, but for me, the breakthrough building for Stirling was, whether one likes it or not, is this building at St Andrews, which was to turn an existing building into an arts centre with two buildings with curved glazed walls and glazing, which is very reminiscent of Haslemere in terms of, including the lift-up partitions in glass containers. But it was figure grand. I think it would have been a great project. Didn't happen. So it was well received, and it was, on the covers of books and everything else like that. I'm amazed how many people were taken as students to look at the building. But I had got interested in politics and took myself off to Chile and that's Salvador Allende, where we lived for 6 months before the coup and then 3 months after the coup. And that was a very special moment. We got there a bit late, and I came back and joined the office and taught part-time at the Bartlett, which was not really what Jim wanted me to do, but and I worked on the left-hand one. I know everybody loves Stuttgart. Nearly everybody loves Stuttgart. But for me, the best of these diagrams, the best of the galleries was the one on the left, which is Düsseldorf, which was working with an existing building, partially damaged existing building. Really amazing geometry. But you get the lime green became an idée fixe. And I then joined Cullinan's. I taught for 3 years. I worked for Jim 2 years. Taught for 3 years at North London Poly. And then Ted said it was time to join the office, so I went and joined the office in 1979. And quite quickly we started working on the Lambeth Community Care Centre, which was, for me, every bit as important as Olivetti. Whole different kind of story. Wait a minute, jumped ahead of myself there. And then one day the telephone goes, and we were still only about 12 people, I think, in Jamestown Road. And Claire answers the telephone and says, "Oh, Robin, it's Jim Stirling for you." Fine. Hello, Jim. Hello, Robin. I think it's time you came back and built number 1 Poultry. I think I'm all right where I am, Jim. Right, bye. The shortest non-job interview ever. And what a good decision that was. But we could argue about that. So he died, tragically, early, ridiculous, in a private hospital, not being looked after properly. And a lot of people passed through through the office. Obviously, Kriya and he fought increasingly, and both claimed to be responsible for various things. It's it was Stirling's lack of a consistent architectural and urban theory that convinced me of its stringent necessity. But I liked Bob Dye saying protective loyalty, which is what I absolutely recognise. And Charlie Sutherland saying, instead we would routinely spend a month developing one drawing. It was a unique apprenticeship. So this was quite a special place. And Barbara Weiss, of course, was the scourge of all tower blocks. So this is the last slide, but there's variations on it. So this is Olivetti would produce, they would send presents every so often, and they sent, I was a huge fan of Ernesto Trova, so when they sent Jim this print, it's quite big, I said, could I have that? And he said, oh yeah, sure, here you go. So that now hangs in our holiday home, which is very nice. This is the umpteenth version of this drawing, because the V&A rang up one day and said they needed a drawing they wanted to buy a drawing. So Jim got Barbara Littenberg to trace my drawing, because she could draw more neatly than I could, and I was a bit busy, and colour it in, and he signed it JS, as you can see there, and sold it for a figure that fortunately I can't remember, to the V&A, and it was in the high-tech exhibition at University of East Anglia, which is very nice. And it used to be in the drawer when you pulled it out in the V&A, the Stirling drawer. But this is the photograph I found this morning in my file, and I think really says it all. It was a great experience. Thank you. I hate to think how long I've gone on for, but anyhow.
Robin, thank you so much. That was an absolutely brilliant and captivating journey. And I think you were so honest and friendly about everything. But you've given this building the exposure that it deserves. Would you mind taking a few questions?
Of course. I want to ask David, though, first of all, whether I told any lies.
All true.
Yes.
Where did James Gowan come in on this?
Well, I don't really know how they got together in the first place, and they worked together on a number of projects. Bob would know probably the origins better than I, and they were completely different kinds of characters, but they had a very common interest in cities, and would spend a lot of time when they hadn't got any work showing on other slides of Georgian cities or Edinburgh Newtown or things like that. They were really thoughtful. And Jim was writing in the early days quite a lot about Corb and other things. But I remember when I joined the office, I remember being told that Gowan always, who was a real detail, he knew, he was absolutely precise person in a way that Jim was not at all. Jim wasn't terribly interested in building construction at all, which is why he let me and David get on with it. But one of the inherited wisdoms was that as Gowan would always make sure that as the architect you should condemn the brickwork in the first manhole to make sure that that the contractor does what you want him to do. That was a kind of, which is, and that's not that's not the way we built it. We built it because Dave Skelly and I really wrestled this beast, and we had a great clerk of works. And we had also a lovely, Dale and Goldfinger had a really brilliant plumbing, a drainage man who I've learned a lot from. But anyhow, that's not, answer back to your question. They fell out after Leicester. I think they're just completely different characters. And it was David Dunster and I were in the same year at the Bartlett, and David went to work for Gowan and I went to work for Stirling. and we were different, and we both enjoyed ourselves. But we had, and I didn't really see. I did one crit with for David with Gowan, but I didn't really know him or meet him. Whereas Jim was gregarious and friendly, and my wife and I would go to dinner amazing parties at his house in Hampstead, and well, the rest was history. It was good times, wasn't it, Bob?
Can I ask you, Robin? You mentioned Barbara Littberg, and I understand that she's currently the wife of Stephen Peterson and lives in New York on a crossroad. How did she come? Did she spend years in Britain?
No.
No.
I think she must have, I think Jim must have met her at Yale or something like that, or might have worked in a school, a project he had on the docks project he did with MJ Long. So I think that's where they met. And he came, it's pure supposition on my part that she was involved with Jim drawing those drawings, but I don't think Jim drew them. And that's entirely reasonable supposition. She definitely did draw the latest first, that drawing, because she came into the office to do it. And I proposed this to Anthony Vidler when he was here, and we went to visit the building. And he said he'd ask her, but life's too short.
I saw a photo last week of Stirling and Shandon at Peterborough in Greece, and there's the little lecture theatre. There's a little bit reminiscent. Do you happen to know when they did a trip to Greece? And was it a direct linkage between that and the little lecture theatre in Olivetti?
Don't know. You know more than I do. But you mentioned, so what was it? Who was it? Did you mention the word Shand?
Well, his wife.
Yes, I forgot to give. I mean, Mary, I thought it was conceivable might be here. She did the furniture for Hazelmere, and she was great ally. And in fact, she was probably behind Jim asking me to go back. And she's still with us, somewhere in London.
What about the landscape, Robin? Was that something that completely escaped?
Yeah, we kind of just left it. The building kind of imposed itself. I mean, I'd have to go off and talk to Cullinans with showing the drawings, and they were all, Julian Wickham was really cross with what we were doing to their building. And I didn't have an answer really, except just to ignore him. And I mean, the landscape was very powerful. When we were having, the trees were magnificent, still are. And when we were having trouble with the planners and we got them all to the site, they all came out into the site. And I was a bit worried because Jim had told me to draw the trees half as big again as they really were on the planning drawings. And they came out and looked up and said, oh, they really are tall. Because of course they were looking up at them. But the landscape was pretty simple. I did find this morning the credits, and there is a landscape. There's not a landscape architect, but there was a landscape contractor. But it was just very basic.
Stirling's career seems to have exaggerated Stirling's stature in the drawings that he did. Was that ever commented on?
No, I don't think so. But I mean, Creer is just the most fantastic draftsman. I mean, just extraordinary ability, and he would love playing games. So there's in the Siemens competition, which was happening more or less at the same time, big round drums. There are office layouts, and you can actually see them in the book if you look carefully. There is office, the furniture is arranged for the managing director's office as a thumbscrew with a torture machine, and there's a noose hanging out of the tree, and there's a Luger pistol on the desk. So that was all part of the game.
One
One thing that difference between the Olivetti Building and what Rogers did, that yellow building, is, and I've always been interested in that in the Olivetti's, these hoods over the windows, which gives the thing a lot more plasticity, a lot more substance somehow than in the Rogers treatment. But on the other hand, I can't see what whoever thought they were necessary or what they're for, but
they weren't functional in any particular sense, but they helped. They did help me with the joint.
Could you put the sort of water penetration above it?
No, because it was properly lapped. It was fine. And Jim was very keen on it. And I did find this morning a lot of drawings where the hoods were curved, and also where the panels were much more curved. So what happened in the end was that it was a continuous smooth thing with these expansion joints that didn't work. Actually, was a really good solution. The hoods, yeah, that's Jim. I mean, the whole building's Jim. All I did was to build it.
Didn't the hoods act as a drip over?
Yeah.
Help
Yeah, there is a bit of thrust, but it would have been fine if it Yep. Yep. I mean, I didn't really say. I think fiberglass. I mean, I know that you worked on the towers, but the fiberglass is not really a very clever material to make buildings out of. I don't think. But it was, the shape. I mean, I reread some of the articles written at the time and the technical articles, and there is a suggestion that probably wasn't any other material you could make it out of.
Well, there was that rather horrid point block somewhere in North Westminster, which
this man here is responsible for it.
what with those square.
Yep, the Indulex tower, the towers.
Yes.
We were talking about it earlier.
Really, that was the same sort of.
Well, that was. They were ambulance body presses that made those, and there was a big press. Ours was hand laid up in Anmac in Nottingham. And the only problem, I mean, it was just fantastic going there. The only problem was that there was you may recall, there was a miners' strike, and the factory had coal-fired heating. And so they couldn't, the whole production line came to a shuddering halt. So they couldn't get any of the GRP to go off.
What have they put over the roof now? Did you see on your revisit?
Oh, it's just they just put it over the top. Yeah, it's nothing special.
It was all single glazed as well.
All single glazed. Well, even what I went on to do at the Lambeth Community Care Centre, which was started, we did lots of how could this be a kind of completely whiz-bang, no-energy building with Max Fordham, because we shared an office with Max in those days. We could not justify double glazing in 1985. There was no conceivable way that on a cost-benefit.
It wasn't standard,
No.
was it?
It is now all double glazed in rather horrible frames, but that's what happens. Sorry, you were going to say.
Can you talk a little bit about the time frame for the actual design evolution? Because it looks kind of effortless and not really agonised over.
It was a 3-year process, 18 months design, 18 months a build. But that first 18 months doesn't include the pre-thinking, and that's the bit I don't know. Never did know, never asked Jim, should have done. We had enough time to talk about it, but he was a man of few words if you're just sitting together. And it was 2 hours or something to get to Hazelmere by car in his Citroen DS. And of course, I was a kid. It was just, he was this famous architect I was working for.
Is there any initiative or strategy for conservation of the building?
Well, I think the new owners apparently are quite keen on looking after it. I mean, there are fundamental flaws, which is that fiberglass expands when it gets hot. So it's going to pump, but it has been re-sprayed in due course. I mean, I'm amazed that the mastic joints still, exist, but whether they've been replaced or not, I don't know. I just loved I thought I was so cross that this evacuated tube didn't work, because it seemed to me such a brilliant marriage of technologies. When Dave Skelly, no, I'm off camera, I think I can say that Dave Skelly rang me up one day and said, Robin, they've delivered this, 3 miles of tube and it won't fit. What do I do? Oh shit! Put it back in the lorry and take it to Leicester and give it to Polyplan. And as far as I know, it's still in their basement in some house somewhere in Leicester. I've no idea. And then I had to find a mastic manufacturer that would produce a lifetime warranty on the mastic, which of course you could never get today, but I mean they did, and would come, and the agreement was they'd come and cut out any joint that failed. Forever. But it just wasn't an issue. It didn't. I mean, and somebody told me recently, you told me, didn't you, that neoprene would have perished. The neoprene evacuated tube would have perished long before. So actually, the solution was probably better. Hannah.
I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the things that have stayed with you after working in Jim's practice, and then secondly, the transition of working in Jim's practice and how he ran his practice compared to how Ted's ran his practice.
Well, I think I've just always had the freedom to work with rather than do what I'm told to do. So that's a privilege, and it worked in both offices. I mean, there was only one thing we built at Hazelmere that it was a very minor detail that Jim made us take off. And he was quite right. We just overdid the symmetry. I think it's such a weird composition. I've never really worked with anything like it since. So, I mean, I think that at Cullinan's we're much more conventional in terms of the planning, but the same interest in geometry. Same interest in how you make things. So I mean, we designed buildings to be made. This, ironically, was a building that was designed without anything, any material or structure or whatever. But my job was to build it, and that's all part of the same game, I think.
Thank you.
Oh, another one.
Your comment about geometry and unconventional sort of planning. I mean, the interesting thing about that drawing, or one of the things that seems to be interesting, is this angle. I don't know what it is, 10 degrees or something. That seemingly arbitrary shift, and is similar in a way to the geometry of the St Andrews buildings.
Yeah.
Where there's the, yeah.
Well, in theory, this was driven by trees.
Oh, was it?
It was kind of, you could have, probably cut down one to make it work, but and it never did grow. So, but I think the geometry, this is the most unconventional composition I've ever worked on. And I think that we at Cullinan's have always thought that symmetry matters, but breaking it matters more.
It's lively, it's what gives that thing.
So, enough?
Before I ask you to thank Robin, can I just mention our next event? So next month, we've got Samantha Hardigan coming in to talk about Cedric Price who Robin mentioned briefly. Fantastic drawing of the Think belt.
Yeah.
So I'm really looking forward to that. That's, I think, on the 10th of June, so it'd be great if you could all come and join us. But anyway, back to tonight. What a tour de force, but what a lovely evening. Robin, thank you.
Thank you.